who have basically become generals because they have a lot of money. Men are cut down left, right, and centre. A stalemate ensues, and for years, trenches full of soldiers sit and stare at each other across a minefield of fortifications. The upper-class twattery have absolutely no idea what to do outside of the only tactic that they know, which is getting everyone to jump out of their trenches and charge at the enemy. The results of this were less than encouraging. Troops were dying by the truckload over turfs of land no more than a metre wide, and the ones that were surviving were starting to question their leader's ability. Talk of revolution was in the trenches, and in Russia, revolution happened. In France, revolution was on everyone's lips. Troops were refusing to go down to the front lines, refusing to go into this first line of trenches, and refusing to fight. So a new solution had to be provided, something that would break the stalemate. Lots of ideas were tried. Bigger artillery, grenades, rifle grenades, bigger artillery, mortars, this slingshot thing, bigger artillery, this medieval crossbow that fired tiny balls, I don't understand, bigger artillery, and whatever the hell this thing is. But it was all to no avail. Thankfully, someone had already come up with a solution. Famed writer H.G. Wells had envisioned a motorized vehicle armed enough that would be immune to machine gun fire and would be able to carry its own gun to destroy fortified positions and drop off troops to capture defenses. Now, H.G. Wells being H.G. Wells, who came up with ideas like this.
Good heavens. That's a dress?
This was intriguing. I wonder just how far women would permit this to go.
Had envisioned an upturned soap dish that fired a laser gun. But the idea caught the public's imagination, and discussions on how this new weapon would work were rampant in the street. There were, of course, two problems. For one, the general public have absolutely no idea how military strategy works or how a military vehicle should work. And for two, this weapon already existed. It was called the armoured car. It was effectively a civilian car armed with steel plate and a machine gun on top. Rolls-Royce had begun producing a dedicated military version in 1914 that was so effective it was still being used in World War II. And there are still many examples around today, granted, in museums. But that wasn't the problem. The problem was the area between the trenches, no man's land, was covered in craters, huge holes left by artillery, as well as large metal spikes, barbed wires, mines, and mud that had the consistency of glue and acted like quicksand, sucking everything down, much like the mood whenever you walk into the room. Being immune to machine gun bullets wasn't the problem. Having something that could cross a trench and then cross that terrain and be immune to machine gun bullets was the problem. So, in 1915, everybody's favourite savage one-liner dropping gangsta war criminal Winston Churchill set up the Landship Committee. If I was to explain the Landship Committee to you, you need to remember several things. Number one, this is in Britain, and Britain has a lot of weird, clappy-trappy, upper toffery, boo-ha bureaucracy to go through. Number one being that the Naval Admiralty, the Board of Naval People, kind of are very, very important. They have a lot of resources, and they have a lot of priority over resources of men, of dockyards, because the Navy is incredibly important. And they get very, very, very pissed off at the Home Office, because into that suddenly comes the Royal Air Force. And the Royal Air Force have complete autonomy. They are their own thing, and now they need resources. They need metal to build planes, and men to equip them and fly them and maintain them and train them, and they need their own airfields and everything, and that pisses the Admiralty off because that's their resources. They're being taken away for something else. So how do you think they would feel if a third competitor suddenly appeared on the field, also needed their own things, and that was a bit of a problem. So Churchill, in his pimpness, mightiness, decided just to ignore all that and do it himself. Literally. I mean, not literally. I mean, he didn't just go out into a field and go, I should build a machine that will win the war, and then just start banging things. No, he didn't do that. I mean, that would be amazing if he did, but that's not what he did. What he did was he got some people together and he said, build a machine. Sorry, I'm not doing the Charles right. Build a machine. Churchill. That's what he did. That's how he sounds in my mind. If you hike them on the beaches and on the landing grounds and in the tops and in the fields, and I shall kick their bloody ass. Yes. Landship Committee. Right. So they test out a bunch of various machines, you know, like this one, which looks like a tram. It's called an induction, I don't know. This one, which is a big wheel landship, a bigger wheel landship, and an even bigger wheel landship they actually planned to build. And then eventually realized, and this thing with the dinner plates on the wheels, I don't understand. And then they realized that tracks work best. The vehicle they're testing here is an artillery tractor. It's just designed to pull artillery. And this particular machine, the man who came up with the design was told, maybe you should put a gun and some armor on this thing and see how that works. And he refused to do it because he just didn't want to. Eventually, the military catch on to what Churchill and the squad are up to and seize control of their operation. But by then, Churchill has something to show them. So he invites the top brass of the British military, royalty, a bunch of politicians, and some guy who had a camera to film everything, out into the middle of a muddy field in the rain, and in front of them, Big Willie, the second tank ever built, later renamed to Mother, because it's the mother of all tanks. There, of course, had been a tank built before that, the actual first ever tank, Little Willie, which many claim wasn't a real tank because it didn't have a gun. These people are idiots, and you can go ahead and ignore them. There was a gun turret on it, and it looked a bit like this. Here's a picture of it in real life. Sadly, it has a tarp over it to prevent the clever Hun, who's always watching, from figuring out what this thing really is. But you can see the outline. So everyone is staring at this box thing as it drives around a muddy field, up and down very steep hills, made to represent a trench. It goes over barbed wire, goes over a few areas, obstacles. And it's pretty obvious to everyone who's present that this is it. This is the solution. This is the answer to breaking the stalemate. And as one, we all come together and immediately start arguing. And I think it would have went a little something like this. Many hours later, the Minister of Munitions said he'd do it, because it was raining and he just wanted to get home. That man was Lloyd George, who would eventually become Prime Minister. Here's a fact for you. The vehicles would be produced in artillery factories, and this is the bit everybody gets wrong. They were codenamed buses, until it was decided that they wouldn't tell the factory workers what they were building, and told them it was water-carrying tanks. And the name tank stuck. So the workers got to work, and after several months, the first tank was born.
A decade before the talkies, a soldier addresses the audience directly, while behind the screen, a real actor speaks his lines. Ladies and gentlemen, I have but one word to say to you. Subscribe.
Hello. If you're seeing this, then you've watched the entire video, the whole way through. Amazing. Thank you very much. Thank you for watching. My name's Laserpig, and this video was an experiment. I've decided I don't want to be a gaming channel because, let's be honest, the market for YouTube gaming is a little bit, tiny bit oversaturated. And yeah, I know history. I'm very passionate about history, and I would like to do more historical content. So if you like this video, you know, do the usual shit. You know, press the subscribe button, leave a comment, hit the like. It doesn't harm you. It helps me. It helps me quite a lot, and I'll know that you liked it. And if you didn't like the video, leave a comment anyway, and tell me why, and then I'll try and fix it for the next video, because as always say, my next video will be better, hopefully, unless like I die in a tragic accident, or I become overcome with the depression and realize that this entire thing was a tragic mistake, and then I'll go to work in a canned goods factory making cans of beans all day. Please save me from the bean factory. I don't want to make beans all day. Anyway, thank you for watching, if indeed you still are, and I hope to see you next time. With love. Kiss, kiss. Mwah.
I need a target. I don't have a target.
Blissfully unaware of the giant crab which comes to destroy him. Yes! Go, my child! Feast on their flesh!
I need a target. I don't have a target. I need a target.
These are some other videos that I made. They're not. They're okay, I guess. I mean, you can watch them if you want. You don't have to.
I don't have a target. I need a target. I don't have a
I
target.
mean, I would like it if
I'm
you
out
did.
of range.
How you doing? How's the weather? Yeah? Sorry, that's too entertaining. I'll be right back. I'm chatting, but I don't have a camera because I don't want to show you my weird face because you'd get confused and then everyone would be like, what is that? Why does it have a segment for a head? Hello, my name is Laserpig, and today is my birthday. Congratulations, me. It's not your birthday unless it is. Then happy birthday to you. If not, happy
I
unbirthday,
need to get closer.
cause that's a thing. Right. I apologize because I do have other videos in the works. It's not just gonna be this, me shotting for 200 hours. But as we get closer to Christmas, I have what we call the big sad or seasonal depression, as many people try to say that it is, and working on videos right now is a bit of a hit or miss for me. So I got about 4 videos in the works. Don't worry, I will be making more content. This is just a stopgap to stop the YouTube algorithm going, "Ahaha, I see you're dead. How dare you not upload once a week like I told you to the end of the pipe with you. Banishment to the sewers of YouTube." And I have to deal with that. Down here in sewage tier YouTube and 0 viewer Twitch TV something. Hello, how are you? Excellent. Thank God for that. Right. What we're going to be doing today is I'm going to be watching a historical documentary and bitching about how bad it is. I'm very drunk right now. We're doing this quite early in the morning because I don't want lots of people messaging me going, "Oh my God, happy birthday!" as like people I have not seen in like 20 years suddenly messaging me and my phone will start pinging. So if you hear lots of pings in the background, that's what's going on. Also, there's a slight chance my mother will be watching this stream, so we're going to try and keep swear words to a minimum. I'm allowed 3 fucks, 2 cunts, and a dickhead. That's all I'm allowed. That's the rules that have been made up. I'm also very, very drunk, and I'm not going to apologize. It's my fucking birthday. And I will have some more beautiful vodka. Because I will be, I'll be taking a drink every time I have to correct a fact in this stupid documentary. You should not do that because we're not allowed to play drinking games on Twitch. I'll get banned from Twitch if it thinks I'm playing a drinking game. So, don't do that. I'll be drinking. You don't have to. Don't drink along. Don't do that. But if you want to drink along, I'm not going to stop here.
I need a target. I don't have a target.
Right, let's get this fucking bullshit started. Hang on, not this one.
I don't have a target.
That one.
I need a target.
That's kind of fun. I like doing that.
I need a target. I don't have a target. I need a target. I don't have a target. I need a target.
This is
I need
German warfare. The Panther. Yeah, you. I mean, I'll turn it down slightly. It gets a bit loud, and I don't want if they make. Oh God, there's a bush coming towards you. Look at him. Oh, here he comes! Also, if they play the song Erica, people will start. YouTube will think I'm an N-word. Not that N-word, the other N-word. Not allowed to say that word anymore because you live in a weird fucking we live in a weird time when everyone's really really sensitive, and you know I remember when I was younger I used to role play.
It's too far away. That ability isn't ready yet. Not ready. That ability isn't ready yet. I'm out of range. I can't do that yet. That ability isn't ready yet. Not ready yet. I can't do that yet. That ability isn't ready yet. I need to get closer. Not enough energy. I can't do that yet. Not ready. I can't do that yet. Not enough energy. It's too far away.
With a group of people on a game, role-play servers on games. Yeah, I know how tragic my life was back then. Yeah, I remember I ran a role-play coffee house, a fascist-themed coffee house called Gustafi. Yeah, we don't it was fun. We had themed coffee and everything, and we used to scream at our customers.
I don't have a target.
Well, don't go into those kind of things. Anyway, here's some
Seeking
artillery.
the origins of the Panther, regarded as one of the
God,
finest
can you hear
medium
this guy? This
tactics
guy spoke
of war,
very, very
we
quiet.
must turn back to examine the consequences for the German army, and in particular the tank arm, of Hitler's momentous decision to order the Wehrmacht eastward against the Soviet Union.
Yeah, this is the thing about all
It's only
these
300
documentaries.
hours
They'll talk about
between the 22nd,
they'll
1941.
talk about
The eastern
Barbarossa. They'll
horizon
talk
from the
about the
Baltic
east.
coast to the foothills of the Carpathian Mountains was lit up by the fire
But you
from a
won't get
barrage
much
of
about, like,
6,000
the
heavy
Desert War or
guns,
Norway
providing
or
the
early
overture
France
to
or anything
Operation
like
Barbarossa, the German assault on the Soviet Union, and the greatest land invasion in history.
that. Is it the
3
greatest land
million
invasion in
men with
history?
3,350 tanks,
Yes.
and supported by some 2,000 aircraft of the Luftwaffe, poured across the frontier, bent on employing the now well-tested Blitzkrieg formula to defeat the USSR in a rapid campaign which Adolf Hitler expected to last no more than a few months.
He's going to say something here. He's going to quote Hitler at some point. I know he's going to say this quote, because they all fucking say it. Wait for it. Wait for
The
it.
dictator of Nazi Germany viewed the Soviet Union with derision, claiming its image as a powerful modern state was a sham. He said, "We have only to kick in the front door and the whole rotten structure will come tumbling down."
There it is. The whole kick in the front door, the whole rotten structure will come tumbling down. Now, there's been some debate if Hitler actually said that or not, or if that was a quote from one of his generals, because his generals believed, because the way things happened in France, and the idea that the way wars happened back then, was once you took the capital of a country, that country was defeated. And that worked in
Save
France.
France.
They took Paris, and the rest of France capitulated almost immediately, even though the entire southern region of France, which still had a pretty substantial army, just surrendered immediately. It was completely unoccupied. It became Vichy France. You know, they sided with the Nazis, the traitorous assholes.
Off with you.
But yeah, they genuinely believed that once they took Moscow, like Moscow was the primary target. Once they took Moscow, all of Russia would capitulate. And that was never going to happen. Because that's the same mistake Napoleon made. Yeah, Russians don't care if you take Moscow or not, because they'll take it back.
Such delusion, while grounded in the first
Well,
instance
yeah, he
on
just
his
said stuff like
anti-Semitic, anti-Marxist and
To be honest,
overtly
this
racist
documentary is not too
philosophy,
bad. It's not the
which
worst
reduced the
one
Slavs,
that's
and thus the
ever
Russians,
been.
to the level of mere subhumans in the Nazi worldview, was
A lot
also
of people
heavily
still think
coloured
Slavs are
by a
subhuman.
German intelligence analysis of Soviet military and economic power that was profoundly flawed.
It was flawed. I think we'll start talking about German military intelligence this point. German military intelligence is fucking awful. It's a front camp. All those tanks. Those are Panzer
This
IIs.
analysis, which underlay German planning for Barbarossa,
That's not. Right there. Right, you can see my map. Right here. That is a 35R. That is a Czechoslovakian tank. That's an incredibly rare Czechoslovakian tank with the weird spring suspension there. You don't see a lot of those. They're tiny, but Rommel used to quite like these things.
was remarkable more for what it did not know
There's another-
about
there's
the new
another right
enemy than what it did.
It's interesting.
Thus, numbers of aircraft and tanks in Soviet service were not known, figures proffered being mere guesses. Little was known of the Soviet order of battle, or of the detailed organization of Soviet military formations. Nor had the Germans any inkling of the profound changes wrought on Soviet industry by the 5-year plans, and thus of the potential of the USSR to fight a prolonged war. In short, the German armed forces had plunged into war with the Soviet Union, sustained only by the unsubstantiated conviction that the Red Army was not fit to engage in a modern conflict and would be unable to defend itself against the most modern and effective war machine in existence.
Okay, so I take. Okay, all of that is true. That the Germans genuinely believed that the Soviet Union were like backwards people that they didn't really know what the hell they were doing, etc., 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 etc. But they're racists. You know, racists are racist. What do you expect? What I take what I take offense here is that they claim that, and this is the perpetual belief that Nazi Germany is still the most modern and efficient way of doing things in a military way, and that our military leaders now are still using the same tech. There's not. The tactic Blitzkrieg is actually, it's not called Blitzkrieg. They continuously refer to it as Blitzkrieg. Blitzkrieg is something completely different. It just means lightning war. And when they say lightning war, they mean, this is based on Germany's generals saying, okay, we don't have enough resources or enough manpower to go on a prolonged, sustained campaign. Everything's got to be done very, 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 very quickly. You know, we can't go back to World War I. We can't be digging trenches and defenses and having huge campaigns that last for years and years and years, because we'll lose, because we just don't have the resources. Therefore, everything needs to be done fast. This needs to be a lightning war, a blitzkrieg. That's what that means. The actual tactic people keep talking about, blitzkrieg, is not blitzkrieg. That is called combined arms, and that was invented in the First World War. Because most people look at the First World War and they think, trenches. Everyone just sat in trenches firing artillery at each other. No, there was mobile warfare. It started as mobile warfare. The first year of the First World War was mobile warfare. And it didn't work because machine guns, everyone started building trenches. And then combined arms come along, which is the idea of using tanks and artillery and aircraft and infantry all at the same time, all working with each other as opposed to independently. And honestly, I think the most modern and equipped and most powerful force in the world right now is probably the USA. Probably. I'm pretty sure Russia would take offense to that, but you know, they have their chance. Oh, there's a T-34 with Mickey Mouse ears. Shit, I'm not allowed to say that. That's
and yet,
copyright.
all that happened in the opening months of the campaign seemed to substantiate German beliefs about the state of the Red Army and the nature of the Soviet state.
Yes.
Unbeknown to the Germans, however, they had chosen to attack at the worst possible moment for the Soviet Union.
Which they hadn't. They'd also having alliance. They had an alliance with the Russians, and the Russians were not expecting well, they kind of were expecting the Germans to backstab them at some point, but they thought they had a little bit more time. You know, they're like, okay, they will backstab us, but maybe not for another couple of years. So they were kind of still transitioning. Also, another problem with Russia was Russia had all the men and equipment and everything. That whole scene about the enemy at the gates. You may have seen it with one man has the rifle. If the guy with the rifle dies, the second man picks up the rifle and continues to charge. Everyone has 3 bullets, but every 5 men have 1 rifle. So that idea, Russia had enough equipment to feed its entire army and to give it all equipment and to give it everything that it had. But that wasn't so people look at the statistics. People look at tales of that, where Russian soldiers were had cardboard boxes instead of on their feet instead of shoes, and were looting boots off the Germans and stuff. They didn't all have guns. They didn't all have bullets. Some of them had potatoes instead of grenades. And then another bunch of people come and say, well, that wasn't true, because if you look at their production history, they produced way more guns than they ever needed, and that's true. What actually happened was the entire logistics force of Russia just completely collapsed overnight, because they suddenly had to ship all these troops over to the west from wherever the hell they were. And the person who was in charge of logistics, like moving military equipment and food and everything else around, was second to people like Zhukov. So Zhukov would say, I need this train to transport men, and so take everything off the train and put men on it. So the men would get there, and then the next train full of men would get there, the next train full of men. So the men were arriving at the front, but their equipment wasn't, because their equipment was kind of like stuck in ports or stuck in train stations waiting for Zhukov to finally say, okay, you can have this train, logistics man. I forget his name. He's very handsome.
The Red Army was not only attempting to recover from the impact of the devastating effect of the purges that had decimated the Soviet officer corps, but also from the shame of its performance in the winter war against Finland.
Yeah, but it
In
won.
June 1941, it was also
Won
in the throes
against
of
them.
massive internal
Finland
change,
capitulated huge
including a
territory.
huge re-equipment program.
There's also talk that Simo, the White Death, the sniper in Finland that apparently killed like hundreds of Russian soldiers by himself, may not be real. I don't know how true that is. Oh shit, nice shot. I don't really know how true that is, but apparently it's a bit exaggerated. These things typically tend to be a bit exaggerated. I keep moving my mouse, and then this.
Although the German panzer columns tore through the Soviet defences, driving
That
deep
guy's just
into
a
the
farmer.
hinterland,
That
German
guy's just a
panzer
farmer.
columns
Look at him.
tore through the Soviet
just a dude.
defences, driving deep into the hinterland and
there's a-
encircling hundreds of thousands of Russian troops in massive pockets within
Aw.
weeks of the opening of the campaign. There were more than a few indications that led many Germans to realise that this new war in the east would be quite unlike that fought the summer before. One officer in the
Russia's
18th
huge
Panzer Division
comparison to
wrote,
France.
"There was no feeling, as there had been in France, of entry into a defeated nation. Instead, there was resistance, always resistance, however hopeless."
But that's another interesting point right there. See, how can I put this kindly? So, Russia, France felt defeated immediately. Their leaders were fucking terrible. Absolutely fucking terrible. And they just, the German army never actually fought the French army. They fought limited pockets of resistance, C-class troops that were had basic level equipment, but all the best French soldiers were on the Siegfried Line, or the what's the French call it? It wasn't the Siegfried Line. Oh no, that's good on me. I've forgotten. Shut up, phone. Hang on a second. This is incredibly professional. Professional YouTubing. Sorry, twitching. Whatever the hell I'm doing. Hang on a second.
Ishnu Dal Dien. Farewell.
Maginot Line! Fucking hell. How can I...
Not ready.
Okay, so all the best... He's not a historian, he forgot about the Maginot Line, he called it the Siegfried Line, that was what happened when, that was the German defences on the other side, or just when they captured the French defences and turned them around. Yes. No, all the best French soldiers were on the Maginot Line, and these really cool defenses. They had little trains that went under them and little tunnels and everything, and they could ship ammo and troops around this and huge defensive network. Really interesting stuff. And yeah, all the best French troops were there, and the other best French troops were surrounding Paris and that kind of area, and the kind of southern region into Lorraine and stuff, and they were told, to surrender. They were told to put down your arms, burn your tanks, and run. And that's what they did. So as the Germans advanced through France towards Paris, they're just coming across, there's heaps of just burnt equipment and just trash lying everywhere, and they never really fought the French army on the scale that they should have. Whereas in Russia, they kind of did. And they start taking heavy losses, like right off the bat. Plus the fact you have the fact that because of the huge territory expanse of Russia in comparison to France, that Hitler decided to take all his panzer units, double them in number, but reduce the number of tanks that each of them had by half to accommodate the greater divisions. So these tank divisions are now at half strength than they were previously. And they've got lots more area to try and cover, and they've got lots more objectives to do, a lot more rivers to cross, little towns where there's little local resistance. So they start taking huge amounts of loss. Germany did have better tanks at the time, but they were sitting in reserve, waiting for the Hitler Youth to grow up. And I'm not making this up. He was just waiting for his perfect doctrinated soldiers to grow up, become 18, and then get into the army themselves, and they'd have the better tanks that were sitting in the shed. Let's keep going.
Indeed, even Hitler sensed as much, telling Mussolini that Soviet soldiers fought with truly stupid fanaticism, with the primitive brutality of an animal that sees itself trapped.
Oh, Hitler.
Well, the Fuhrer, no doubt,
Gotta
saw
love
such
Hitler.
as
I mean, he
confirming
killed
evidence
Hitler, so you know.
of the subhuman nature of the Russians. Even he could not have missed that these same subhumans had already killed over 100,000 German troops in the opening weeks of Barbarossa, more than in all the previous campaigns combined.
I love the added effects they're putting in the background of a tank engine. I know where that sound comes from. It's from a German propaganda video. You show it in this documentary somewhere. I pointed out to you.
Nor were the Germans oblivious to the seemingly endless numbers of Soviet divisions that made their appearance on the battlefield, only to be fed into the German mincing machine.
I think he's going to give some
Then
numbers
replaced by
soon,
more.
and that's a drink.
By the end of
because
July, the Germans had already identified more Soviet divisions
Guess
than
them
the
all.
estimated the Red Army possessed. The Soviets were profligate with their manpower, but in the face of the rapidity of the German advance and their unpreparedness to cope with blitzkrieg, they had to trade lives and space
Yes,
for
I've watched the
time.
documentary before. If you did.
Thousands and thousands, then hundreds of thousands of prisoners were taken. One German soldier later recalled, the earth-brown crocodile slowly shuffled down the road towards us. Prisoners of war, Russians, 6 deep. We couldn't see the end of the column. As they drew near, the terrible stench which met us made us feel quite sick. We made haste out of the way of the foul cloud which surrounded them. Then what we saw transfixed us where we stood, and we forgot our nausea. Were these really human beings? Those grey-brown figures? Those shadows lurching towards us? Stumbling and staggering? Moving shapes at their last gasp? Creatures which only some flicker of the will to live enabled them to obey the order to march?
Very poetic, that, isn't it? I can't find that poem anywhere, but I'd love to know who actually wrote it, because it sounds like propaganda. It sounds like it's been written in an office somewhere, and like a propaganda minister is like, I just signed your name there, and we'll print it in the paper.
On July the 16th, less than a month after the beginning of
'Cause they did
Barbarossa,
that.
the city of Smolensk,
You know, you have
just
no
200
idea how
miles from Moscow,
crazy the German
fell to the
propaganda
panzers
unit
of
actually
Generals
was.
Hoff and
They had
Guderian.
a small team
In
of
their drive
destroyed
eastward,
Allied tanks. that
German
they drove
armour
around
had
with
brushed
them.
aside or destroyed
So
large
if,
numbers
like,
of Soviet tanks.
The team
Guderian
had
had
not
estimated
destroyed
before the
enough
start of the
Allied
campaign
tanks at this point.
that the Red Army possessed a
They
tank
would just
park
take
of about
photos of the ones they
10,000
brought with them.
machines. And this was the benchmark accepted by the army. However, it was becoming all too clear that this figure was much too small, and that the real figure was in excess of some 20,000 tanks.
Nope.
Hitler later stated to Guderian
Incorrect.
that had he known Russian tank
Yeah, so yeah, that's what he's saying there. I was talking over it, so I apologize. What he was talking there is the German intelligence believed the Russians only had a few thousand tanks. They put that figure at 8,000, potentially. Mostly old tanks, like a lot of early Russian tanks were British export tanks, especially ones like the T-26 range and stuff. Like the I think, what is that? The Vickers Mark III or something? I can't remember. Anyway, you can look it up. It's fine. Anyway, so and the BT series, which is just the American Christie tank, and the C-30. I'll talk about the T-35 later, actually. But yeah, they thought 8,000 tanks. He says 20,000 tanks. It was actually closer to 40,000 tanks. They had a lot. They had an absolute lot. And keep in mind, Germany, when it's invading, 3,500 tanks.
strength to have been as large,
Just giving you a
he would
bit
have
of
seriously reconsidered his decision to invade
a
Russia.
bit of just how fucked they were at this point.
Numbers, though, did not equal quality. By far and away, the bulk of Soviet armour was obsolete. Most of the designs dated back to the early 30s, drawing heavily on foreign designs. What the newsreels show the most of are wrecked and burning T-26s, T-28s, T-37s, and light tanks of the BT series. None mounted a gun larger than 45mm, and all had thin armour. The short-barreled 50mm gun of the Panzer Mark III and the short 75mm gun of the Panzer IV had no difficulty destroying these tanks, and the footage herein shows large numbers of these tanks destroyed and on fire. Even the 20mm cannon of the Panzer II light tank and the 37mm gun on the Panzer 38T had no difficulty taking out these light Soviet designs. Even the large
There
and
it
impressive
is.
T-35
That is a T-35. Now that is one particular T-35 because that one's not been destroyed, it's been abandoned. And that's very important because this particular T-35 you're seeing here, there's a big thing in the 1920s about multi-turreted tanks. I fucking love multi-turreted tanks. The 1920 came up with some crazy tank designs. But let me find you a picture. If YouTube will allow... No, I keep saying YouTube. Because I'm a fucking moron. Where is it? Okay, so yeah, War Thunder did a thing where there it is. I think. Yes, there you go. Okay. You should be seeing it now. So that's the Vickers A1E1 Independent. That was an actual tank they built. It's still around. It's in Bovington Tank Museum. You can go see it. And so that is like one of the first like proper multi-turreted tanks in the 1920s. They built these big things. I was like, because you know back in the 1920s, like after the First World War, they're like, what do tanks do on a battlefield? What should their purpose be on a battlefield? Should they follow the troops around? Should they shell the enemy from afar? Should they? Yeah, this is my British general impersonation voice, by the way. You know, should they? And someone came on with the idea of, I've got a great idea. How about they do everything? And so they built this ridiculous thing. It's got a ladder on the side and everything. Holy shit. They built this ridiculous thing that could do technically anything that they need that thing to do without modification. Excuse me. Now, apparently, and this is where things get spicy, like creaky chair, by the way. Please sponsor me, chair companies. This creaky chair is really annoying. I cannot afford a gamer chair. Also, I look like a sandwich in a cardigan, and I think I'd look very, very strange on a proper gamer chair with like Ninja or something written on the back. I don't know the name of any other popular streamers. Young people, tell me who is popular. Who is popular in the Twitch stream? I don't. Anyway, more drink. Ninja's a streamer, isn't he? Yeah, the blue-haired guy. Yeah, I know him. I know. Okay, I know who he is. There, I've said a modern reference. Now I'm cool. Anyway, yes, no. So supposedly, the plans for this tank, the A1 Independent, a lot of British people at the time, especially ones in government, were going, well, the tank is too expensive. They'll never be on a battlefield. Will never be used again. And one particular chappy decided that that was not the case, and was like, you're all fools, and communism is the best. And so he apparently defected to communist Russia, taking with him the plans for the independent A1E1, which were developed into the T-35. Now, there has been a lot of controversy over this, which I will not get into. A lot of spicy tea in the history community. I was like, oh, is that true or not? I don't know. It might be, it might not be. The Russians claim the T-35 was independently created, and those plans were never used. British people say otherwise because the influence of the design is clearly there. But you can do what you want with that information. I don't really care. Anyway, back to this bullshit. So this particular T-35 was captured. It wasn't destroyed, and this very interesting model was used in combat again by the Germans in 1945 in the defense of Berlin, when they had they basically it was taken back as a war trophy and placed in a small museum there outside the Reichstag with a number of other tanks, including my absolute favorite French Charbie 1, Charbie 1, a Char2C. No, I'm looking at another picture of a tank now. Oh, you know what the Char2C looks like? I've got one on my desk. It's beautiful. Yes, no, you will not see my fucking. It's like, hey, can we see cookies? Can we? Okay, that's it there. That's what it looks like. It's huge. Blitzkrieg tank. So there's one of those outside the Reichstag, but also a T-35, and these were used in defense of Berlin, and was shot at by the Russians and presumably destroyed. But anyway, let's keep talking.
The multi-turreted tank seen here was highly vulnerable to German fire. But amid this welter of obsolescence, there were a number of new designs that sent shockwaves through the Panzerwaffe. In the KV-1 and KV-2, the Soviets had two machines technologically superior to any German tank.
Also known as Stalin's fridge, for reasons. That's a huge turret there. Jesus Christ. I'm taking a drink here because, you know, I always have to point out to people exactly when just putting thicker armor on a tank count as advanced technology.
KV-2, the Soviets had two machines technologically superior to any German tank.
I mean, if I
armor
wear a
as thick
shirt
as that
that's
encountered
thicker
on
than
the
your
British
shirt, am I more
Matilda,
technologically
and
advanced
heavy
than
armament
you?
as well, in the case of the KV-1, a 76mm gun, and on the KV-2, a 152mm howitzer, these were truly formidable machines. Shells from
Nothing to
German
take them out.
tanks bounced off the armor of these monsters. But it was the T-34 that made the greatest impression.
Here we go.
Fast, weighing some 26 tons, with well-sloped heavy armor, and carrying a 76mm gun, it came as a revelation to the German tankers.
Okay. This tank here. Can we discuss this tank for a little bit? People are probably getting mad at me, like, please stop pausing the video, just let it play. I don't want to hear you talk. This tank, we have a bit of a problem with this tank because in a video that I haven't produced yet, I will be talking about something called the Panther Paradox,
I'm out of range. which
is partially why I'm watching a short documentary about the development of the Panther. I'm going to put this delicately. There are soft factors and hard factors in tank design. Hard factors being firepower, speed, and armor. And soft factors being how quickly can you repair it, what are the sights like, how quickly can you open the hatches, how quickly can you reload it, how good is it in terrain, so on and so forth. The T-34 is another one of these good hard factors, bad soft factor designs. And a lot of people absolutely love this tank and will defend it to death. And if you say anything against it, they will bring the fire of hell against you. It's like trying to push yourself upstream. It's like, I don't think the T-34 is any good. How dare you, heretic, burn the witch! It's basically what they're like. I have a long-standing feud with a guy called tanksarchive.com who has a fucking boner for the T-34, thinks it's the best tank of the war, thinks it's the best tank ever, has visited an archive, so he's telling the truth, and he's an actual historian, unlike us plebs. I've been to a fucking archive, show your face.
Luckily, it was only available in small numbers and poorly employed.
Yeah,
The T-34 being examined here
the early
was the
T-34s
earliest
didn't have
model
anti-tank rounds.
coming
They
off the
had,
production line in 1940.
explosive rounds for some reason.
As in France, when dealing with the heavily armoured British and French tanks, the 88mm flat gun was found to be able to deal with the new Soviet tank designs.
Not ready. That ability isn't ready yet. I can't do that yet.
That's what you get by the 88, by the way.
German infantry found other methods for destroying.
Again, the fucking Flak 88 is like seen as this mythical war-winning weapon by many people who are generally seem surprised that we're still not using that stupid gun. The thing about the 88, the Flak 88, is it's not because that gun was good. It's because German anti-tank guns were fucking awful. They were terrible. They couldn't do anything. They were the worst in the world at this point. They were absolutely awful. With the vast majority of the tanks that they were facing, of course, they never really fought the French tank to tank that much. Every time they did, they would lose. On a tank-on-tank warfare with the French, they would either lose or they would be forced to try and run around the French tanks really quickly until the French tanks basically burned out all their fuel, or they couldn't see them because they had these stupid one-man turrets. Against the British, against the cruiser tanks, the competitive cruiser tanks, because they were very lightly armed. The heavier tanks, the Matilda 1s and 2s, they couldn't even scratch. So Rommel almost died to a Matilda 2. So the Matilda 2s would just drive over the guns because they couldn't do anything. And so he took command of the Flak 88 battery, ordered them to fire the British tanks. And then in his report described an invincible armada of hundreds of Allied tanks, immune to everything we could throw at them. And that is what caused the Great Halt order. Right down the German command tree was Rommel just absolutely shitting himself. So if anyone ever tells you it was Hitler being merciful and allowing the Allies to escape, they're lying. Now you know the truth.
Destroying T-34s and KVs.
But yeah, those tanks were
Saturn
very
charges
rare,
were
but
placed
not
on
quite
Soviet
very correctly.
machines. Although this required great nerve, as a soldier had to run up to the tank in order to deposit the charge on the engine deck or wedge it below the turret overhead.
A regular tank that's
Such
immune
methods were quite often the only fallback in the absence of an
weapons.
effective anti-tank gun. The
The
37
88 is the only thing that can penetrate this. The 88 is a
as it
big,
was unable to
slow,
penetrate the
cumbersome
Soviet
thing
armor.
that takes a while to aim, takes a while to set up, needs a specialized crew.
It was only with the launch of Operation
Which is
Typhoon,
very bad.
the
when you
German
have,
offensive to capture Moscow.
It's very bad when you have. He's about to say something about Guderian, and I'm gonna fucking rant about Guderian. I'm only 11 minutes into this. Jesus Christ. I'm gonna have to shut up and let the documentary play at some point. But what was I saying? No, the 88 is actually it's a terrible gun as an anti-tank gun because it's cumbersome, it's slow, it needs a specialized crew, it needs different sights, and it's only effective because the other German anti-tank guns are fucking terrible and can't do anything, can't fucking destroy anything. So everyone's like, oh, the 88 is amazing, it could destroy any tank in the battlefield. It's like, well, every other faction also had similar guns to the 88. They just didn't need to use them because they had better anti-tank guns. You fucking muppet, shut up.
In late September 1941, that the T-34 became a real threat to the Panzers. With the onset of the Rasputitsa, the period of rain before the start of winter, and which turned Russian roads into quagmires, the German Panzers sank up to their axles because of their narrow tracks, whereas the T-34 coped with the conditions because theirs were much broader. At Midzensk on the 4th of October, T-34s operated in large numbers for the first time, inflicting heavy casualties on the Panzer IIIs of the large number.
Go back, wait. Oh. I was looking at this tank here, I was like, that's
Midzensk on the 4th of October, T-34s operated in large numbers for the first time, inflicting heavy casualties on the Panzer IIIs of the 4th Panzer Division. Guderian was later to comment that it was at the Battle of Midzensk that for the first time the vast superiority of the T-34 became plainly apparent to the Germans.
Okay. Guderian. We need to talk about Guderian. I apologize again. I'm going off in a pre-ramble. We need to talk about fucking Guderian. So, imagine you're a World War II German commander. You lose the war, you come out the other end, there's a big trial where they're trialing all these Nazi war criminals, but you've never committed a war crime. No one can prove you've committed a war crime, so you get away scot-free. So, excuse me, so you now have to take care of your future, you now have to take care of your own career. What are you going to do with your life? And well, the army's all you know, so you want to stay in the army. And so you go around and you say, well, all the war crimes, all the crap, it was all the Nazis. It was all their fault. They're the ones that fucked everything up. I wanted to do it my way. You know, so Guderian writes, so the War Memorial, the War Documentary, and the War Diary becomes very, very popular after the Second World War, for all these surviving German generals trying to prove that they knew what they were doing. It was all Hitler's fault. Like he was the mastermind behind everything. They kept getting everything wrong. They kept fucking everything up because they wanted jobs in NATO. When West Germany became West Germany and the sort of Soviet bloc started to form, they wanted jobs in NATO, and that's exactly what Guderian got. He wrote this huge memoir where he basically takes credit for inventing tank warfare, and then he becomes an advisor for NATO because he tells them, "Oh, I fought the Russians. I know how to defeat them. Give me money," and NATO does that. Because they're expecting to go to war with Russia. So if you give Guderian any amount of money, he will say whatever you fucking want. So because his diary and his version of events was taken as gospel and accepted that was all true, until early 2000s, when something very interesting happened, and that is British intelligence MI5 declassified a lot of documents from Bletchley Park. And what was happening in Bletchley Park, apart from the coding office that was decrypting all the German coders, there was a huge mansion there that was being run by a man who was the brother of the king. You know, I'm the brother of the king. This is a very good friend of mine. You know? And what they did was they got all these German officers that they were capturing throughout the war, any rank, and they were all putting them all together in this mansion, and they were given their own rooms, they were given fresh water, showers and baths and good food, and taken on trips to Mayfair and London and everything, and treated like fucking royalty. And what they didn't know is, firstly, that brother of the king was actually a secret agent in disguise, and the entire building was bugged. Everything they said was being taped and recorded and then listened to and translated. And so all their conversations are kept on record. And it was only when we got access to these records and started looking through it, you realised just how much of a fucking bitch fest German High Command actually was, and how much, I'm going to use it now, I'm going to use the word, how much of a cunt Guderian actually was. How much of a lying cunt he was. I'm sorry, Mother, I've said it twice. Yeah, he just made shit up left, right, and centre. He was not a good general, and everyone knew he was not a good general. But he liked to take the credit for everything, and his underlings were well aware of this. But that was how you got advancement in the German army. You politically embarrassed your rivals, took credits for everything good, shoved everything bad, and then you advanced through political favour. It was the German High Command was a Game of Thrones, basically. There's tales of like entire German infantry divisions being killed and being sacrificed, basically to help save this one general's career, because he's like, well, I could share this intelligence and tell them that they're about to get overrun and tell them to retreat, but they're commanded by General so-and-so, and if he loses that, oh, he'll have nothing left, and then I'll get promoted. And it's like that's how they that's how they operated. It's really interesting. Someone's a book all about it, and if you get the chance to look it up and read it, then absolutely do it, because I can't remember.
And when Typhoon finally ground to an exhausted halt at the beginning of December, large numbers of T-34s belonging to the fresh divisions and trained from Siberia led the Soviet counteroffensive in front of Moscow on December the 5th, 1941. By then it had become apparent to the German army that it had to take steps to address the clear technological superiority in tank design possessed by the Soviets and represented in the T-34.
In fairness, every tank that they were coming across was superior to pretty much any tank that was built in the late 30s was superior to their own. German tanks, especially the early German tanks, were fucking awful. Ooh. Hang on a minute. Yeah, That's a doing a whole sort of Tokyo drift there. That's Jagdpanzer, I think. Could be a Stug, but it's got this kind of slippy bit at the back, so I think it's a Jagdpanzer. Very rare tanks, those. Very rare.
In October, a Panzer Commission met with General Heinz Guderian at Orel in
There he
Russia
is.
to consider ways of responding to the T-34.
Look at him.
In addition to continuing
God,
development
he
of the
looks
heavy
like
Tiger
doesn't
tank,
he?
the decision was taken to proceed with production
Oh,
of a
there
new
it
medium
is. There's the big
Panzer
boy.
under the designation
everyone's favourite fucking tank.
VK-3002.
And then there's
Contracts
this.
for
This
which
is a
were
wooden
issued
walk
within days of the return to Germany.
Supposedly,
The initially
this is what
favoured
inspires
design from
the
Daimler
design of the
Benz
Panzer.
clearly reflected the influence of the T-34, with heavily sloping armour and turret mounted far forward on the hull. On May the 15th, 1942, Hitler acceded to the recommendations of a report that favoured production of the alternative design submission from the Mann Company. The prototype
Basically, so they make their own version of the T-34 using basically cobbled together spare parts that they had lying around. And then they decide that actually they don't want to do that. They want to build a much heavier tank, and so they built the Panther, which had already been in production as a replacement to the Tiger anyway, and didn't have anything to do with the T-34 at all.
Mann Panther incorporated the
drink.
many changes foisted on the design team in the course of the new Panzer's development.
Oh no! I'm
Weight
gonna
had
have
grown
to
to
pour
45
myself
tons,
more.
and the tank now mounted the longer, more formidable 75mm L70 gun. Contracts were issued in September 1942 for 1,000 Panthers, with the first leaving the Mann Works in January 1943.
The man works.
Parallel production lines were set up with Daimler Benz, M&H, and are seen in this still at Henschel Castle. It was at the latter concern that a very brief glimpse of one of the new Panther medium tanks, seen just beyond the Tiger in the foreground, was captured on newsreel
You can't
in May
see it, but that should be
1943.
bright red.
The new Panther had a very short gestation period,
They had them
from
painted
drawing
them
board to
bright
production
red
line in
at
just
the
over a
factory.
year.
This is like sort of a rust-proof thing.
There was much optimism that this new tank would provide the Panzerwaffe with the technical edge on the Eastern Front it had hitherto lacked. The first model of the Panther was the Type D, identifiable by its drum-type commander's cupola with lid hatch, a machine gun flap on the left side of the glacis.
Out of range.
In other respects, such as armour thickness, it's to remain the same on all preceding models. 80mm for the frontal plate, 120mm for the gun mantlet, and 40mm on the sides.
That's a drink. He'll say this. He'll say the side armor again at some point earlier on. He'll get it wrong again. It was actually 30mm on the side. That is disgustingly thin. Yeah, 30mm, like early British tanks. Show you one.
That spell isn't ready.
Oh god, that's a model. Yeah, it's so cute though. It's so cute. Oh, hang on a second. Look at it. Look how cute that is. Oh, it's so tiny and adorable. I love it. That's an early British cruiser tank. I think that's actually a Venter. Maybe? I'm not sure. No, it's a cruiser Mark IV. Okay. Says it right at the top of the goddamn screen. Yeah, that's got a 2-pounder gun. That can crack through 30mm of armor. So, like, even like really stupid early tanks that were all terrible, the Panther is vulnerable to them. Yeah, 30mm side armor, bad choice. But they made it so huge, and oh god. I think they were kind of hoping that like
The early Model
would
A
compensate,
mounted
but,
a new turret with a cast cupola
thing is,
with
you
7
hit it
periscopes.
right in these wheels.
The later A saw the introduction of the machine gun ball mount for the glacis.
Tank explodes.
Introduced in March 1944 was the G, which was to remain in production until war's end.
The G is the one that
The combat debut of the Panther
is the one
during
that,
Operation Citadel,
fixed all the
July
problems.
1943, was decidedly inauspicious. This last German offensive in the east was meant to be a limited affair, fought over a very restricted geographical area and rapidly concluded. But in terms of the actual number of tanks and forces allocated, it was a major commitment of scarce resources at a time when the scope of the war was widening dramatically. In part, it was to address this quandary that Citadel was launched. The task of the offensive was to destroy the great Soviet salient at Kursk and eliminate the vast Soviet forces therein, thus shortening the front line and freeing up panzer divisions for transfer to the west to deal with the expected Allied landings on the mainland of Europe. Originally planned for the spring, Citadel was repeatedly delayed to allow for adequate numbers of Ferdinand assault guns and Tiger and Panther tanks to be assembled. For Hitler believed that only with their presence in sizable numbers could a favourable outcome for the battle be assured.
You can start to see Hitler's slow, receding
No footage
belief
exists
in,
of the approximately 200 panthers committed to the offensive.
and combined arms.
Organised
and
into tank
everything
battalions
becomes more
51
focused on
and
tanks.
52, and under the
Kinda thinks
command of
like us a
Major
little bit.
von Lauchert, the Panther Regiment was subordinated to the Grossdeutschland Division during Citadel. On paper, the Panther Regiment represented the most powerful armoured unit at Kursk, but its effectiveness was to be severely inhibited by its premature commitment to battle.
I actually quite like he makes the difference there. That like on paper, the Panther and the Panther armor divisions look as impressive as hell, but in reality they're fucking shit.
Although raised at the beginning of 1943, the two battalions suffered so many problems with their Panthers that most of them were returned to the factories for overhaul or rebuilding. Guderian, now Inspector General of Armoured Troops, called the Panther our problem child, for it was a maintenance nightmare, the inevitable fruit of a very hasty development and production schedule.
They just couldn't handle the weight of the tank.
Even the crews did not receive the time to
Part
fully
of that
train on
was
their
to
new
do
charges.
with, sorry, I'm pausing it again, I do apologize. So part of this is to do with, there's a secret war going on in the background. So I'm going to assume you're not stupid, you know what tungsten is. So tungsten's very, very durable, very, very solid metal. You need it for a lot of specialist equipment. Now, a lot of tungsten comes from Spain and Turkey and several other countries, and Britain is buying it all. Doesn't need it. Britain has a lot of its own tungsten, but it is literally just buying all the tungsten it can at hugely inflated prices that Germany cannot afford. And because of this, because they don't have so much tungsten, when you get to designs like the Panther, they knew how to build a tank that was heavy and had a good suspension, but they had to go back to an older style suspension that couldn't handle the weight because they didn't have the tungsten to build it.
I can't loot that right now.
So, yeah, the Panther's suspension and drivetrain and everything is really outdated and it's really bad, and that is what is causing the Panther to continuously break down. And because they are trying to push out as many Panthers as possible, they're not building spare parts. They're just building new Panthers. So every time a Panther breaks down, it has to go back to the factory to be repaired because they don't have spare parts. Unless there's another Panther nearby that they can cannibalize. But because of the same spare parts, the ones that are breaking.
I need to get closer.
If you find another broken down Panther, it's mostly like that part that you need is the thing that's broken. So
5 days into the
That's
offensive, there
still
were only 10
recharging.
Panthers operational.
10 Panthers.
Although just 25 had been destroyed, 100 had broken down. While the frontal armour had proven effective, the 40mm side armour was shown to be vulnerable to Soviet anti-tank fire, many Panthers being lost in this fashion. Nevertheless, the
what happens.
75mm gun was shown
So
to be
happens when
highly
your side armor is
effective,
terrible.
destroying T-34s at 3,000 metres. As the production tempo increased, more Panther battalions were being raised and hastily deployed to combat the growing power of the Red Army, which, having wrested the military initiative at Kursk, was in the months after the battle pushing the Germans back all along the southern part of the front. By October, there were 5 Army and
looks
SS
impressive, doesn't
battalions in action in
You gotta admit,
Russia,
the Panther is
with
a
others
fucking
coming on
sexy
stream in
tank.
November. The furious pace of operations and
look at them
continuing
all. They're all on
technical
the train.
problems led to high losses. And of the total of 841 Panthers deployed to the Eastern Front in 1943, only 80 out of an available 217 were actually operational on December the 31st, some 624 machines having been lost in combat since July. Nevertheless, it was only in March of 1944 that Guderian declared the Panther fully combat
I don't have a
capable.
target.
He declares it fully
Throughout the
combat
winter of
capable, but it's still got
1943-44,
huge
the Red Army
problems.
launched a series of hammer blows against Army Group South,
I mean,
whereby the
those
German
suspension
lines were
problems
frequently
never
breached.
fixed.
The Panzer divisions
Always
found
be a
themselves in the
problem,
role of
always
fire
be breaking
brigade,
down.
rushed from one point to another to contest each new Soviet
Especially
breakthrough.
when you're doing this.
Extemporized battle groups comprised of elements from different units, with integral all-arms support were often raised to deal with such contingencies. One such was Heavy Panzer Regiment Becker, which had 47 Panthers and 34 Tigers, and was employed as the point of an armoured relief column assembled in early February 1944 to punch a corridor through to 60,000 German troops encircled around Cherkassy.
Basically what they're doing with these Panthers is they've got them into huge divisions, and these divisions are just driving from left to right all across the front, dealing with any Soviet breakouts. The Soviets attack and then these Panthers are activated to drive towards that particular battle, which is a good way of doing it. That's a good way of defending your line. You have mobile defenses instead of static defenses. And you have fire response teams. It's like if you need reinforcements, these guys show up and then help you out. The problem is because the drivetrain is so weak, these things are, the more these things drive, the more they break down. So they're losing more to breakdowns and having to, oh crap, I hit the microphone, sorry. They're losing more to breakdowns and leaving more Panthers behind because they can't take them with them than they're actually losing in battles. And this is just... Oh,
Mid-March 1944, 4 Soviet rifle divisions, supported by a number of tank units, encircled the German battle group under the command of SS Gruppenführer Herbert Giller in the town of Kovel, a major rail centre for European Russia and of great strategic importance to both sides. A relief force was assembled by the Germans, which included elements from the 4th Panzer Division and was led by a company from the Panther Regiment of the 5th SS Panzer Division Viking under the command of Obersturmführer Nicolusy Lech. The German attack was hampered by the bog of ground that surrounded the town and which made for excellent defensive cover for the Soviets.
It is also an awful tank, but I think I've rambled on too much now.
The only firm ground available to the
Try and
Panther
stick to just the
lay on the
Panther.
upraised railway embankment which led
So we're
into
almost an
Kovel.
hour in, and I'm only
Those
20 minutes
400
into
hours
this
on the
hour-long
30th of
documentary.
March, Nicolusy Lech advanced along the embankment with 9 Panthers, but then almost immediately lost 2 to mines. The mines were cleared by following infantry, but it was not until the evening that the Panthers finally broke into the town to strengthen the defenders. For his leadership, Nicolusy Lech was awarded the Knight's Cross.
It's got a big radio turret.
A number of Panthers had been abandoned along the embankment, victims of mines and Soviet anti-tank fire, including this Befehlspanther, or Command Panther, identifiable by the second area mounted on the rear of the hull.
I just
After
told
the
them that,
battle,
thank
the
you.
Germans used
Jesus.
captured Soviet prisoners to help recover the knocked-out Panthers, most of which were repaired and returned to service. Also recovered were the bodies of the dead crewmen, who had been so rapidly interred in the sandy soil between the railway lines alongside their abandoned charges.
Grizzly.
Kovel was finally relieved on April the 5th by a further attack involving Panzer IVs and assault guns from the 3rd Panzer Division, along with other Panthers from Viking. These broke through the strong Soviet defences, covering the northern approach to the town along the Kovel-Brest-Litovsk road.
That stuff isn't ready. That's still recharging.
Anti-tank positions were destroyed and overrun, and Soviet tanks, including American Shermans supplied under Lend-Lease, were knocked out on the drive into the town.
You get a lot of Lend-Lease tanks, mostly Shermans, but they had
At the end of
lot
August
of British tanks
1944,
in Russia.
the Soviet summer offensive had all but destroyed Army Group Centre
Valentines especially.
and
They
carried the
loved
Red Army
Matilda.
to the borders of Poland.
They were okay with
It was here that a
the
propaganda
Valentine. I don't
company
think they
film
liked the
team
Churchill
recorded
that much.
footage of heavy fighting as the Germans desperately attempted to halt the
There was
Soviet
some
drive
Crusaders
westward.
as well, but I don't think
By
they
this
liked
stage of the war, Waffen-SS units were given particular prominence when filming, and on this occasion the PK team had focused on a localized counterattack by the 5th SS Panzer Division Viking. Under the command of Sturmbannführer Maedres, elements of the Panther Battalion, supported by Panzer IVs, deployed to attack an advanced Soviet armoured unit of 23485
There's
and
one thing
JS2
about,
tanks that have
German
occupied
propaganda
advanced
really
units,
showing back
elements
to
by the 5th and filming. And on this occasion, the PK team had focused on a localized counterattack by the 5th SS Panzer Division Viking.
There he is. Okay, so that's like a commander of a panzer team. What he's doing there is he's pretending to give orders because the propaganda team would shoot what was going on, and then they would look over the footage, and if the lighting was wrong, if the pose wasn't heroic enough, they would go back and say, okay, I need you to do this shot again. And so they'd have a German commander strike a more heroic pose and pretend to give orders and everything, and and trying to get the lighting right. So it was just perfect for the propaganda reels.
Fours deployed to attack an
See a
advanced
lot of
Soviet
that
armoured
happening.
unit of
Rommel was
T-3485
especially
and
back to
JS-2
back.
tanks that have occupied a number of nearby villages. Fire is opened on the Soviet positions by Vespa and Hummel self-propelled guns. The Panthers begin to move towards the target using their speed to move rapidly from one fire position to the next. Grenadiers then follow up in their armoured half-tracks, ready to mop up Soviet infantry in advanced positions. Panthers engage Soviet armour, while the Grenadiers move forward to flush out other Soviet infantry that have gone to ground in the cornfields.
I love the way they're using that MG. It's like, yeah, just lean on me, we'll use that. Oh, that guy's pelvic bone is
As
shattered.
the infantry advances through the first burning settlement, SS Gruppenführer Giller, commander of the 4th SS Panzer Corps that carries his name, holds a rapid orders group to determine the next objectives of the
He's in
assault
the
and
background a
attack.
bit obscured because he
A
doesn't look
reconnaissance
so heroic.
detachment of Volkswagen Schwimmwagens and one-ton
He looks
half-tracks
professional.
move out to scout ahead of the infantry, who now fan out across the wide and unbroken wheat and maize fields. Half-tracks follow up advancing Panthers, who roam across the fields completely devoid of any cover. It is the measure of the secondary role played by air power on the Eastern Front that German armour could still operate in this fashion, underneath the sky empty of Soviet aircraft,
There's
while
a
far
high
away in
chance that
Normandy.
these tanks aren't actually
Such an
shooting
operation
at
would have
anything.
caught the immediate attention of Allied fighter bombers.
They're just propaganda shots.
Viking's Hummel detachment has moved up and brings other Soviet positions under fire from their 150mm guns.
Not just a Better Call Saul
Panther
reference.
commanders now scan the next village to determine targets and tactics. Fire is then opened, and shortly thereafter, Viking grenadiers enter the village to find a large number of destroyed and fiercely burning T-3485s and JS-2s. The latter was a heavy
Fuck's sake, right. He said it, didn't
and
he?
fiercely burning T-3485s and JS-2.
Yeah, he did. That's a big drink. Heavy Soviet tank. JS2. If you ever call it a JS2, I will fucking slap you silly. It's not a JS2. It's an IS2. And a lot of people make this mistake because it's named after Stalin. So Joseph Stalin, therefore JS2. No. Fucking nimness. It's Joseph in English. In Russian, it starts with an I. Joseph Stalin. Not Joseph. IS2. Get it fucking right.
The latter was a heavy tank introduced in the spring of 1944. Its 122mm gun is one of the few weapons that could easily penetrate the frontal armour of the Panther.
No kidding.
The very high muzzle velocity of the 75mm L71 gun still allowed
The 120mm cannon on an IS-2 is actually it's an overglorified artillery piece. It's not got a great amount of penetration capabilities at all. That was one of the big problems of the IS-2. Why it wasn't particularly used that well or particularly effectively.
the Panther to effect a first-round hit and penetrate the turret armor of the Soviet heavy tank.
But it had very, very heavy armor, so by the time you were in range, you could penetrate it could probably penetrate you to that distance.
Other factors such as training, the quality of German
Besides,
optics, and
like
command and control
120
procedures
millimeter artillery
went into play in order
smacking
to
you
bring
like
about
that.
the sort of
That's
results seen
enough
in this
to
footage.
pound of your heads.
Even
Hello. Maybe. No, that's a T-34. I thought that was a Crusader for a moment.
Even though German armies
maybe. No, it's
continued
not.
to inflict heavy casualties on the Soviet tank arm, they were never enough to dent the immense numbers being turned out of Soviet factories to replace them.
That music that's playing in the background, I think that's not allowed to be played on YouTube. That might be a bit of a problem later.
Further to the north, the 1st Panzer Army, having been pushed back into Latvia
Might
and
be or might
Lithuania,
not be. It's
by the
usually
1st
just
and
there's more
2nd Baltic
propaganda
fronts,
shots.
was engaged in fierce defensive
It might just
fighting.
be Erica. You can't play.
Panther
Not
battalions
sure.
fought alongside Tiger
People are very sensitive about these
and
kind
the
of
footage even gives a glimpse of a couple of surviving Panzer IIIs and early
T-35.
Mark IVs. The limited counterattacks being undertaken by these German units, though successful in eliminating local breakthroughs, had no impact on the wider picture. Soviet pressure continued to build, and within a matter of weeks, 3rd Panzer Army was fighting in East Prussia, with 16th Army holed up in Courland. Nevertheless, in the tank battles fought by Panther crews, there must have been many occasions when others did what this crew is doing, acknowledging their good fortune and offering up thanks to crooks for the effectiveness of their armor plate.
I'm not going to say.
On the 6th of June 1944,
Frontal armor
the
was
long-awaited Allied invasion of Europe took place with virtually unopposed landings on the coast of Normandy.
Unopposed landings on the coast of Normandy. I just run you by what he said there.
The Allied invasion of Europe took place with virtually unopposed landings on the coast of Normandy.
Unopposed landings! Unopposed landings! Oh! We're all taking a drink for that now. Fuck Jesus. Oh God. How? Oh. I'm not even touching that with the fucking barge pole. No, no. You watch any World War II documentary and just look at how unopposed those landings were.
Under a massive air umbrella, the Allies managed to land 150,000 men and 500 tanks by day's end. Rommel's insistence that the invasion could only be defeated on the beaches vanished in the absence of a strong panzer force in proximity to the Normandy coast.
Okay, here's the other part. Again, Saint Rommel was like the weirdos, like fucking Jesus. He'd really be like that. So he says that like the landings need to be. We need to oppose the landings immediately, as soon as they happen. We need to fight them on the beaches. And a lot of people came like, well, if only there was like, if only Rommel had got his way and had put tanks on the beaches and he'd been able to fight them, then we don't be speaking German now because D-Day went over. It's like, it's bullshit, because I'll tell you exactly what happened. Because a Panzer division did in fact attack the Allied landings. I believe Hitler Youth,
I can't carry
the 25th SS, the Hitler Youth, with their Stugs, attacked the Allied landings. And what happened was something which would have happened if any Panzer division had attacked the Allied landings, and that is a battleship opened fire on them. It doesn't matter how good your tank is, if a battleship opens fire on you, you're fucked. Rommel didn't know what he was talking about half the time. That's why a lot of the suggestions were
where the
ignored.
panzer should be stationed, as well as reflecting the long-held view that the Allied landings would take place in the
There's some
Pas-de-Calais.
great pictures of some unopposed
Even
landings
after
right
June
there.
6th, Allied misinformation would continue to reinforce the German belief that another landing was expected in that region. Even before D-Day, and certainly thereafter, Allied air power was employed to paralyse the movement of German traffic on the ground, with the Luftwaffe long swept from the skies in France. Once ashore, the Allied task was to reinforce the lodgement area, bringing over forces from England as soon as possible, so as to build up Allied strength to combat the inevitable German reinforcement in Normandy. German attacks on the 6th had been cursory. 21st Panzer Division had moved against the British-Canadian landing beaches and received a bloody nose. On the following day, the 12th SS Panzer Division was in action against the Canadians, effectively blocking the drive to seize Caen, originally targeted for capture on D-Day itself.
Stuart Little.
Ultimately, the battle for
Because
Caen
apparently his
would
parents
become the
fucking hated
linchpin
him.
for the wider Battle of Normandy. As Allied forces moved inland off the beaches, they rapidly came up against one of the intractables of the campaign, and to which little or no thought had been given in the planning stage of the invasion. If the Normandy beaches were chosen for their suitability for mass landings, the countryside inland from the beaches was ideal for defence. The hundreds of small fields, divided by centuries-old, high-banked and almost impenetrable hedges, punctuated by copses and small forests, known to the locals as the bocage, made forward movement in the face of a spirited enemy extremely difficult. The Allied air campaign to halt the daylight movement of German reinforcements to Normandy, especially by the Panzer divisions, was no better illustrated than by reference to the travail of the Panzer Panzer Division. As one of the most powerful armoured units in France, it was ordered to make for Caen on the 6th of June and travel in daylight. Due to the constant bombing and strafing from Allied aircraft, the forward units did not arrive until the 8th, and the division was not fully in place until some days later.
They actually have King Tigers. It's the first time King Tigers have been seen in the Western Front.
This experience was to become a common one, with divisions forced to travel at night and lay up in forests or under the trees in the daytime. The massive use of Allied air power for this purpose led to the extensive destruction of many towns and villages on the approaches to the Normandy battlefield.
Yeah, Cannes was pretty much just flattened.
Along with the Tiger,
Which
the
is
Panther
sad,
was the
you
most
know.
powerful tank in Normandy, with a total of 484 sent into action in June and July. In theory, the 1st Battalion of every Panzer regiment should have been equipped with Panthers, but this was not the case, with just 7 out of the 10 Panzer regiments in Normandy being so equipped, and with the majority of these belonging to the Waffen-SS. The bulk of Panthers in
The
Normandy
Waffen
were the
SS
A-1.
gets basically they're the
The
glory
smaller
boys.
number
They're
of
hated
Ds
by the regular
and a
German
few
army
Panther
because they
Ds.
get all the good equipment and everything.
The Allies rapidly came to fear the Panther.
Out of range.
Although it fired a lighter shell than the 88mm gun of the Tiger, its extremely high muzzle velocity allowed it to take out any Allied tank at long range.
There's going to be a lot of drinking and a lot of bullshit. Unfortunately, I've almost drank this entire bottle, which is not a good thing. Yeah, there's gonna because this is where the bullshit of this documentary gets even wilder, and that's what the Allied response. The Allies fear the Tiger. Potentially, yes, because about when you take into account all the Allied troops on the
I
Western
can't
Front,
trust that yet.
about half of 1% of those would ever see a Tiger, and we're talking like Tigers were employed quite viciously and quite well done. You know, they weren't fucking around with using them using Tigers. So typically they'd be deployed from ambush positions, and what would happen is the myths and legends of the Tiger kind of overtook the actual functionality of the Tiger. So every time a tank was getting hit by an 88mm, it was like, oh, it's a Tiger. Every time they'd see a German tank, oh, it's a Tiger. So the Americans at this point by the time the Normandy campaign ends, the Americans have claimed to have destroyed more Tiger tanks than were ever actually built. So that gives you some perspective on the kind of what's going on in the typical mind of an Allied soldier at this point.
Shermans, Cromwells and Churchills were all easy targets at 1,000 yards.
You notice he's now switched from meters to yards. You know, when he's talking about fighting the Russians, it's all in meters. And then when he's talking about the Allied tanks, he has to switch to yards. So it's still 1,000. It's a big impressive number. You know, it's this fucking documentary.
The vulnerability of Allied tanks to the Panther and Tiger nearly became a political scandal in the United Kingdom.
Nearly became a political scandal. This line gets repeated quite a lot in almost every single documentary you see. They talk about it nearly becoming a scandal. What that basically means is it did not become a scandal. These Allied tanks, I was talking earlier about hard factors and soft factors. Allied tanks, especially the Sherman and the Cromwell, the cruiser tanks, pathetically laughable in the hard factors compared to the Tiger or the Panther. Very good in the soft factors. Very, very good in the soft factors. Vastly superior in the soft factors. You could reload those guns faster, you can repair them faster. You can camouflage them a hell of a lot easier. They even run on less fuel. And the thing about a Panther is if you take out just one of those wheels, I mean, there's a picture of a Churchill on the screen, so I'll take that as an example. The Panther has these interlaced wheels, and if you take out one of them, you've basically disabled the Panther, because the Panther needs a full set of wheels to run. Maybe get by on one damaged wheel, but if it wants to replace that damaged wheel, it has to take off one wheel, and then another wheel, and then another wheel, and another wheel to get to that wheel that's right at the back. The Churchill pictured here could lose about half of those wheels and still run fine. And you just it's one bolt and it comes off. So you can repair that easily, and the tank keeps going, and that's more important on a battlefield than thicker armor. Tank armor is overrated. I'll do a video rant about that on a later day. We've got 20 minutes to go. Hold on there!
Intervened to insist that
We've
the
got
threat
20 minutes
posed by
to
the
go. We
German
can do
tanks
this!
was overblown, and that Allied tanks were well up to the task expected of them.
And he was right. They were.
While such a
Sherman's
view
fucking
may have been
beast of a
acceptable
tank.
for official consumption, Allied tank crews remained extremely skeptical.
It was a rare crop.
Many Allied tanks now began to carry extra armour in the form of welded-on track shoes. It was, however, discovered that a Panther could be killed by getting close enough to get in a shot
This bit
on the
here.
lower part of the gun mantlet. The tank shell would then ricochet downward to break through the thinner hull top armour above the driver and machine gun operator. American tankers also discovered that a shell ricocheting off the ground in front of the Panther might penetrate the lower hull armour. With both these
Okay. So was any of that actually fucking true? Here's the thing. Yes and no. So that shell ricochet tactic was discovered with the Tiger, and it was found to be a very effective way of taking one out. You could aim, unless you're on soft ground, you could just aim a shot just in front of the Tiger to hit the ground just in front of it, and the shell would bounce up and hit the rear and hit the lower armor and through the bottom. You could also hit the turret mantlet, and the shell could potentially ricochet downwards into the tank itself. These were viable tactics, but these were not the main ways that American tankers especially would be taking Panthers out. What they would do is there's this whole myth surrounding Tigers, and that is it took 5 Shermans to take out a single Tiger, and that is because when I was talking earlier about fire response groups.
That spell isn't ready yet.
So you'd have a breakout, and then your fire team would arrive to reinforce you. A fire team in the American lines, and often the British lines as well, was a squad of Sherman tanks, of which there was 5. So if a Tiger appeared on your front line to start attacking you, and you requested support from the fire team, 5 Shermans would show up. So that's where the whole myth comes from. And if they realized what they were fighting, it's like, oh, it's a heavy German tank. Right, okay. What they would do is they would position 1 or 2 Shermans really far away, just firing pop shots, trying to distract this thing, trying to distract the Tiger, and then the other Shermans would just slip in around the side and hit it in the side armor. And that was the tactic that they used. The tactics for deflecting shells, either through the bottom or through the turret mantlet, those were kind of like emergency tactics. Like if you find yourself going mano a mano with a Panther or a Tiger, this is what you do. But by this point, Shermans also have they have an emergency round on board. So they have an APTPT core tank round. I don't know what it's called, but it's basically it's a tungsten core tank. It's the thing that opens up, and there's like a tungsten dart inside. Each Sherman would have typically about 1 of those. Some would have 2, and that was like an emergency. Like, okay, I've turned the corner. There's a Tiger in front of me. Load that shell, and that'll go straight through a Tiger at almost any range. But the invincibility of the Tiger is kind of, and Panther kind of somewhat overblown. So Panther had a slightly better frontal armor, and there was because it was sloped, it had a greater penetration, a greater bounce thing. Which God, I should stop drinking.
I can't.
I'm slurring my words again. This is why I don't live stream that often. Yeah, so because it was sloped, the shell would bounce off, but not so much on the Tiger, because the Tiger was less. It was kind of sloped, but it was less sloped. But a Sherman within like a couple of 100 meters range, its regular armor piercing round would go straight through that Tiger. Again, tank armor is not as good as you think it is. It's but I think
methods required the Allied tank to get well within the Panther's gun range. It took a brave crew to attempt such a tactic.
That's still recharging.
didn't. Emergency tactics. I told you it's for emergency tactics. And not
Only the
standard
Sherman Firefly, a conversion undertaken by the British,
Let's go talk about
whereby
the
they
Firefly,
replaced the low
though. It's just-
velocity,
Everyone loves the Firefly.
short-barreled 75mm gun of the Sherman with a modified version of their own 17-pounder anti-tank gun.
Put the big
Gave
gun
the
in
Allies
it.
a
Doesn't
tank that
fit.
could
Tilts it
penetrate the
sideways. We
18mm
can't get the
frontal
radio.
armour
Put a
of
box
the
in the back
Panther
and put it in
combat
there.
ranges. Fireflies were issued on the basis of 1 per troop of 4 Shermans. Naturally, Panther commanders attempted to target the Fireflies first in any British
Interesting
tank
story
attack.
about the Firefly.
The long 17-pounder
Americans obviously
barrel
never
being
operated
a
the
unique
Firefly,
recognition feature.
but did buy some.
Tank crews often tried to disguise this so as to render the tank less obvious.
So, I forget.
Fireflies were
big German,
successfully
big
destroyed
American
Panthers,
commander.
as is seen in the still of
Eisenhower.
a knocked-out Model A in the Odon Valley. Until the arrival of the American M26,
He
with its
wanted
90mm
Pershings,
gun just before the end of
and
the
they
war,
wouldn't let him have the
the
Pershings
Firefly remained
because the
unique in
Pershings
its
were still being
ability to
tested.
take on
And
and
he
kill
said,
the
no, we
big
need
German
Pershings.
cats.
We need a heavy tank. Anyway, no, you can't have them. And so what he did was he very, very publicly
Even Panthers could not
ordered
withstand the mighty
100
explosive power
Sherman
or blast
Fireflies from the British.
the heavy
And
shells
the Americans
lobbed
was
in
like,
land
what?
onto
What?
German
Americans
positions,
using
with a
Americans
mirroring
using
accuracy
British
on
tech? We
heavy
can't
guns
do
of
this
naval
now.
vessels lying off the
And
Normandy
so
coast.
then he got the Pershings.
With calibers ranging up to 16
there's
inches,
a tank that's been
the effect of
flipped
one of
over by
these
a
shells falling
battleship.
alongside
Yeah,
the
that's
Panther
what happens
was enough to flip
if
the
you fight a
45-ton
battleship in a
Panther
tank.
onto its back. Movement of German armour was very often targeted by such means, with similar results.
Yeah, don't be doing that. That's why you don't attack the Normandy beaches in your Panther.
Fighting
you're
among the
not invincible.
hedgerows was very much
It's
the
just a
opposite of
battleship,
the
just
conditions
shoot
for
your
which the
region.
Panther was designed. The difficulty in moving in daylight meant that tanks in effect functioned as mobile pillboxes. In such circumstances, the smokeless powder and very low muzzle flash of the Panther made it difficult to spot to oncoming Allied armour.
He says that if
Throughout the
that is
fighting
as
in
if that's
Normandy,
unique to the Panther.
most footage
not all
shows
tanks
Panthers very
had
heavily
that.
camouflaged,
You see these little
with masses of
things
foliage covering the machine.
on the front of tanks, like little box
Indeed,
thing that's got
the
holes in it.
skillful provision of such
that is
became quite
flash
literally a matter
suppressor.
of life and death for all
And
Panthers
they all
in
had smoke
Normandy.
alarms. Yeah, see that thing? That's a flash suppressor. Pretty much every tank has one of those, especially in the Second World War.
Even as the Allies
Here
were
it is.
grinding down the German forces in Normandy, the propaganda ministry saw fit to show
Remember
the
when I said
comparative
about an hour ago they had taken a bunch of tank noises and put it over the footage, and I was like saying, "Oh, it comes from a propaganda film." This is it. This is the propaganda
of a
film.
Panther against an Allied tank, even though that chosen was an M3 Lee, which was no longer serving in armoured divisions in Europe. Naturally enough, the footage clearly reveals the superiority of the Panther. One can only assume that the ministry had determined that having seen this film, German civilians would go home to their beds confident that the fate of the Reich must be assured if the army possessed such superior weapons.
Now, just on
determined
this
that
point
having seen
here,
this film-
so what's happening here is we've got a climb test between a Panther and an M3 Lee, which is an old Allied tank, no longer in service. They've refused to use a Sherman because the Sherman actually outperformed the Panther during the first test, so that footage was deleted immediately. What you can't see the slope at the bottom here, because what's happening here is the Panther has actually you'll see that the slope appears to be a bit higher than the one the M3 Lee is on. That is because there is a step here. The Panther is coming up a step. There is not a step in front of the Lee. In fact, there's actually a spike. So as it rises
German
up, it
civilians would
hits
go
the
home to
spike
their
and
beds
gets
confident
stuck.
that the fate of the Reich must be
It would
assured
actually,
if the army
climb
possessed
that
such
hill
superior weapons.
perfectly fine. Propaganda! Oh, look at the little command car.
German veterans of the Normandy campaign always recall to their horror the overwhelming
so
impact
stupid
and ground
that they've just got,
operations
like, leaves all
of
over.
Allied fighter bombers.
They were actually scared of planes. Yeah, the
In
Allies had
particular,
air superiority.
The RAF Typhoon, which carried 8 60-pound rockets, had an explosive power that could defeat even a Panther.
And then that's all you
Although
get.
only a single battalion of the Jagdpanther served in Normandy, it made a very singular impression.
There's
Designed as a
sexy
heavy tank
fucking
destroyer,
tank.
employing the Panther
God,
chassis,
everyone loves the
the Jagdpanther mounted a version of the 88mm PaK-43
Gorgeous.
heavy anti-tank gun that also equipped the Tiger II heavy Panzer which saw service in Normandy.
Was
The
that any
88
good?
mm Pak-43
No.
had been employed by the Army as an anti-tank weapon since 1943.
Problems in the
Although
sights,
large,
like
heavy and
big
cumbersome,
problems in the sights.
its very high
Couldn't see a
muzzle
fucking
velocity was
thing.
able to defeat any known Soviet and Allied tank at ranges of up to 3,000 meters. The fighting compartment of the Jagdpanther had been designed by extending upward the side plates and upper hull
We'll talk about
of a
a
standard
fight
Panther
they
tank.
have with Churchills at some point. They
Just
usually always do.
392 were produced in total, supply never being able to meet demand. Footage of these vehicles is very scarce, this Jagdpanther being filmed on the Oder in 1945.
Yeah, they're rare as Croziers, those things.
This Jagdpanther, found abandoned, minus its tracks, along with two others, had ambushed a squad